Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for November of 2023. I've got 13 new releases that I spun over the last month, a little bit of catch up, a lot of new surprises, and some stuff that I was already pretty hyped for that I'll be talking about in this video with time codes. Listen in the description if you'd like to skip around the video to each individual album review. Not a whole lot of setup I want to throw into this. December, as always, is going to be a stacked catch-up-a-thon to close out the year at the beginning of the next. Hopefully you're excited for that. Hopefully you're excited for this. Give it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and dive on in.
Slay the mighty set, slay the mighty set, slay the mighty set, slay the mighty set.
King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard dropping multiple records in a year isn't all that surprising. They've kind of made that a part of their identity as a band. However, the two records that they've decided to drop this year, Pentadragonic and The Silver Cord, are of a similar ilk, but deviate in their own really interesting ways. While Pentadragonic sees them trying to fuse their more jam-centric approach that they've sort of adorned with the thrash metal experiments seen on a record like Infest the Rat's Nests, with a sort of overarching concept across it, The Silver Cord sort of tries to take the synth-heavy approach that was seen on a record like Butterfly 3000 and integrate it with the more extended ideology that came out through their more jam band style that they've, been toying with. And while I liked it on Pentadragonic, I think it pays off much better on The Silver Cord. And it's got an interesting sort of album construction that is actually similar to another record from this year that I really loved. Gridlink's Coronet Jupiter, the grindcore album that has like itself and then an instrumental version of itself at the end of it. This album more sees them showcasing the foundations of the album throughout this sort of abridged version of the track listing that more focuses on the hooks and the roots in, rhythm, and then expands upon them in the extended versions that follow after each track has been sort of shown off. I think it's a really cool way to construct a record, and I actually think that the short version blends together in a way that creates its own listening experience separate from those extended mixes and creates a really cool duology that kind of feels in the spirit of like King Gizzard in a way, because King Gizzard at this point in their career have done so fucking much, and to see them sort of try to blend all of these worlds into one huge net and actually pulling it off pretty successfully, in my opinion, is a testament to their talents as a band. While the first half of it definitely evokes Nonagon Infinity with how well these tracks fuse together, I enjoy the 20-minute versions of some of the tracks that coat the extended mixes. Do I love all of them? No, but I think all of the foundations are at least really fucking strong. And as far as adapting one zone experiments a la what they did on Butterfly 3000 to this, I think it shows a better understanding of utilizing those components at least more fruitfully. I really like Butterfly 3000 still. I gave it an 8 out of 10 when it came out, and I think that was a nice sort of deviation for the band, especially at that point in their career. I would argue this definitely feels in the same vein. I think that they just, they make cool stuff when it comes to the synth-heavy stuff, and I think that as far as adapting that into a more cyclical, almost dance-style approach lends to them experimenting with this in a live setting. I love a lot of the cyclical nature to the songwriting, and I think that it lends to some good hooks like in Thea and in Set. Hell, Swan Song has moments that I feel sound like early Prodigy in the best way possible with its synth choice. I really enjoyed this. I think this is a record that I think will stand above other aspects of their catalog that I've enjoyed thus far. While it's got some moments that may sort of feel like they tie into some of the mythos and concepts that they've been building on some of their records in recent years, it doesn't feel as heavily steeped in those concepts in a way that I think makes it feel a little more refreshing, similarly to Butterfly 3000. I like this thing a lot. I think it's really good. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I think it's really strong, and easily out of the King Gizzard stuff that's dropped this year, out of the two, this is my favorite by a little bit of a margin. When I saw that Dan finally dropped into the Skyhill project last month, I had intended to listen to it then, but given what I'll be talking about after this, I'm kind of glad I pushed it off. But Dan's been kind of busy and amidst his own success with Game Grumps musically. Outside of NSP, he's been dipping into other, musical ventures that I've had curiosity with across the board, but I think that this Skyhill project definitely sits higher up on that echelon. I think Run with the Hunted is a pretty interesting avenue for him to explore. I think that the pairing of his, powerful voice with the synth-driven atmospheres of that led to a pretty good pairing that I think gets rekindled full stop on this new album Out with the Moonlight. I think that this type of production suits it. I think, if anything, the increase in quality production helps match the power behind the synths with Dan's voice. The flourishing that happens on tracks like the first two banger combo of The Last Domino and Howling at the Moon have these euphoric rushes as the chorus wash over that I think helps keep the groove kinetic and powerful at the same time. I like that they pair them with these more lower key emotional driven songs like Stockholm Syndrome, which has this really nice sort of groove within it where Dan explores the, obviously the feelings of being caught with somebody else that you may not want to be with anymore. I also like that they decided to do duets on this with Maya Wine on Ghostlight, From Dust, and the closer, the title track. I think that she pairs really well with Dan's voice and adds more to the emotional through line that this record has in its lyrics. There was this metaphor spinning of love with the wild on the debut that I think definitely feels recaptured on this. And I like a lot of the imagery within the lyrics that help enhance that sort of whimsy within a mystical twist, which while I do enjoy a lot of that production of, and I think that there's at least a strong consistency within this project, I will say this record suffers from what I would argue is a little bit of diminishing returns. I enjoyed seeing these two come back together and make a enhancement to their sound, create this continuation of some of the emotional cores that this group had a good job at striking, and I think that a lot of the creative choices help sort of expand that. But I think especially throughout pockets of the back half, I honestly thought the track Fireflies was the single from 2015. It's not, and that's a little weird to kind of have these pairings of songs that aren't the same but are. It's a little confusing and makes this album feel a little less creative at the end of the day. I do enjoy a lot of this record, though. I think that especially when they get more electro-driven and have this sort of dance-style core to the energy, I think that they excel. I love the lower-key, more bass-driven Quiet the Lions, and I do like the power behind of a track of the hook, like The Whisper. But there's just some pockets of here where the lyrics kind of sit in an ambiguous gray, and the sonic palette doesn't do anything to enhance it or give it a flavor all its own. Vague Lines is a track along those lines. And between Firefly and Fireflies, I think Firefly is a better song than Fireflies. I do think it's solid, though, and I think that if you've enjoyed what Dan did with this project, with Run with the Hunted, you'll take away some things to like from this, because I surely did, but I'm sure that there's other fans that'll like it a little more than me. I'm giving this a 7, because I do think it's really fucking solid, and I think that a lot of the sort of new age sounds on here feel a little more realized than on Run with the Hunted, and I think that the just enhancement in quality sort of helps bring their ideas to life, but in that same breath, it shows some of the cracks that may have been buried amidst the sort of lo-fi approach that coded Run with the Hunted. Not only did Danny drop another sort of album outside of NSP, but Brian finally did something musical outside of NSP. And I was really excited under the moniker Trey Manifique with the album Mature Situations, which sees him seemingly coming together and just making a adult contemporary album with Twerp. I know that Commander Mouch at least produced it, but it feels like it evokes a lot of the city pop atmosphere that lies on some of Twerp's projects, but with a sense of irony that feels like they're in on this bit of creating an album that is laid back and chill, but doesn't take itself too seriously. The clean production helps give each piece of the arrangement its place in the in the sort of core sound, and it gives it this sort of like earnestness that shines on tracks like the opener Satin Velvet, or on Daddy Lawbreaker, or on Shaka Raka. But there's some moments like on Down to Funk or Night of a Thousand Solos, or on You Got Jazz, where it definitely feels like they're aware of the type of music that they're making, but have a lot of fun with it. And I think that that fun makes this album a little bit more of an enjoyable experience to me. You know, similarly to an album I'll talk about later in this video, it's interesting to see an artist sort of create this album where there's like an instrument at the core of it that acts as the lead when there is no real lead vocals to carry these sort of laid-back, loungy tracks. There's some moments on here where it very much evokes like the bossa nova, you know, jazz pop sounds of records that I've grown to love over the years, like stuff that like Sergio Mendes writes, but without that little bit of oomph to set it over the edge. While I do like a lot of the saxophone playing on here, and I think that Commander Mouch's production in particular just really lets that component shine, I do feel like it's missing a little bit of something else to push it even further into those realms. I do think that it's got a good idea, it's got a good execution of it, and I like a lot of this. Like 41st and 8th's sort of synth groove very much evokes that city pop atmosphere in a way that doesn't quite reach like waiting room levels of like tepidness. The bass groove on there is just so tight, and the laid-back swagger that coats the closer, I Could Get Used to This, feels like it's washing over you like the shore on a nice sunset. I don't know, I like a lot of the energy that this album champions, and as far as like comparing both NSP solo records that dropped recently, I do like Trey Manifique at least a little bit more, if only because it does feel like a sister project to a band that I really fucking enjoy. I am giving this an 8. I don't know, I don't think it'll end up super high on my of the year list, but as far as like clean sheen, laid back music that knows what it is but leans into that in some pretty ironic ways, I like what this has going on. So I will not be doing a Spotify Wrapped video this year just because, one, I think it's fun to talk about Spotify Wrapped, but honestly, at this point, I just don't think it's that deep to me. I like talking about the music. I like sharing what I ended up indulging in a lot this year or over the past year, but I don't know, it's just not that deep to me anymore. That being said, the biggest surprise to me out of my Spotify Wrapped, outside of Everything being the band that I ended up streaming the most, was my Song of the Year, which was Just For Me by Pinkpantheress. I like Pinkpantheress. I think she's got some bops, but I didn't realize I listened to that song that fucking much. It did get me more excited to spin her debut album, Heaven Knows, though, which did drop last month. And I think that as far as, like, an artist knowing their shtick and not only playing it up to the 10th degree, but writing some infectiously catchy songs that tap into the emotional truth of an artist, this is that. I fucking love the sounds of this. I'm a sucker for like that 90s, 2000s electronic nostalgia that she definitely taps into, but she finds a way to bridge the gap between those inspirations into a modern scope. And I think that outside of letting that lie with some of the collaborations to help make it feel a little more modern, the way that she writes feels less inspired by the past and more tries to bridge that to now. You know, yeah, using Rema and Ice Spice and Kelia and Central C do help modernize it, and I think are some really good collaborations. I love Another Life, and I think that it's an incredible opener, and I think Boy's a Liar Part 2 is a really good single as well. But the fact that Mosquito kind of feels like a continuation of a track like Just For Me, or the Internet Baby feels like sort of a look back on the past in a more solemn way, while having this sort of modern viewpoint of it, is where I think this record shines even brighter. I think that this thing is fan-fucking-tastic. While I wouldn't say I'm an expert on her back catalog, I at least like what deviations from what I expect from her do pop up on here, like on Feel Complete, which has this more almost trip-hop inspired vibe that, again, is tangential to a lot of the inspirations I know from her, but she still helms so fucking well. I also like that the sequencing of this album gives way to this sort of back and forth between the then and now in this relationship that Pinkpantheress is seemingly writing from the perspective, or writing about. I don't know. This album is great. It's definitely going to end up on the higher point of my best of the year list. I think if you want a good collection, I think if you want a great collection of 90s electronic inspired bops, Heaven Knows is absolutely a place that you should go as far as like tapping into that nostalgia that is permeating through pockets of the pop scene. Pinkpantheress is just doing it in some of the best ways, in my opinion. I'm going to be giving this an 8. I can see myself bumping that to a 9 at some point, but I think this album is fucking fantastic, and I think that you should listen to it.
Panic in a paradigm, attacking the familiar world. Evacuate, bleeding hard, I had to let the horses out, and we step forward.
Like I said last week in the Aesop Rock video, I've been spinning Aesop anyway in anticipation for integrated tech solutions, but it motivated me to finish my Garbology video before the year's end, given I'd have to integrate this into his discography. And what I like about ITS is that it doesn't continue the quest from Garbology. It picks up where Spirit World left off, which saw Ace trying to find a way to circumnavigate his mind while metaphorically presenting some of that throughout an experience that I feel like more mirrors some of his roots in some really strong ways, while also finding ways to broaden his production style and tap into some, you know, experiments to enhance that concept. And what I like about this is that it does that, but in a way that further explores the concept of man's own exploration, and this more puts Ace within that observation of the progression of man. And I think that it is another strong outing from one of my personal favorite rappers of all time. I think that the expansions on the production lead to some cool moments, like the Salt and Pepper sample flip on Salt and Pepper Squid, fuzzy synth that feels like textbook Ace production on the lead single of this, Mindful Solutionism, which was a banger on drop, and I think is a really good sort of showcasing of more this album shtick. That lo-fi synth edge coming back in on tracks like Living Curfew or on Vitulus, which I think has a very vintage touch to it that feels indicative of the vibe this album tries to set forth from the intro onward. It's still an Aesop Rock album. It's still got, like I said, his piece within his observations of the world at large, like on Pigeonometry, where he throws some great turns of phrase and a hook that feels all the more poignant on a track about why he likes to draw pigeons, or on 100 Feet Tall, which recounts his experience of meeting Mr. T as a child, which on observation and reflection acts as sort of his own reflection on a point in his life where he wasn't in Mr. T's shoes. While other tracks like Living Curfew, which is a fucking Aces collaboration with Billy Wood, sees both of their experiences as the night falls on a city, and it creates its own sort of commentary, while Bermuda spins metaphors of peace with flowers, or Solid Gold gives Ace the chance to story tell through the POV of a criminal. It's got a lot of that Ace Rock nuance, but I think the ways that he injects his own observations on man and culture as it's progressed with some choice collaborations, I think create this blending of ideas that I think excels in a lot of choice ways. Hell, he even uses this point of observation on the progression of man to reflect on his grandma in a really nice way. It's still got the dense verbosity that I come to Aesop for, but I think that it's cool to see him sort of pivot adjacently to the places that he's delved into deeply in the past, like when he decided to create a whole record about man's relationship with labor in so many different ways. I don't know where it'll sit within his discography, because I still, like I said with the Garbology review, are letting the themes of that wash over me more the more that I revisit it. I still like this record, though, and I think that it's another strong album in this year, and I like how Ace decided to construct his own progression as an artist this time around. I'm giving it an 8. It's a really strong outing, and I think that if you've enjoyed Aesop's work and you've wanted him to sort of look a little more outward, this gives you the chance to do so in some choice ways.
When I did it, you wrote a line, put it in your wallet. Gangster, I knew won't hold himself like Monster Cody.
Actually, speaking of Blockhead, I also spun Blockhead's newest album that came out last month, The Ox, because again, I knew I was doing this Aesop video by the point that I decided to spin this, and thought that this was like an ample opportunity. It's just kind of a perfect cocktail of things lining up in November that I definitely wanted to seize. And I liked Free Sweatpants, which was his last, and my introduction to Blockhead's like solo production discography, because while I've loved his collaborations with Aesop in the past, I never really thought about diving into his own solo production discography, and I've liked going on the excursion post Free Sweatpants' release, and it made me more excited for the Ox, especially given a lot of the people he was working with on here. Obviously, Ace crops up on a couple of tracks, on Mississippi and Ponzu Sauce, respectively, both of which have their own niche Ace rock touch, with Mississippi basically being the inner monologue of someone counting to 10 Mississippis before they come and find you, and Ponzu Sauce sees Ace Rock and Breeze Bruin chopping it up and spinning his own nuanced verbosity onto a pretty smooth beat. Billy Woods bookends the project with 2 really strong collaborations, the last one being a posse cut that has Despot and Danny Brown coming back together, and Bruiser Wolf, who crops up on here a couple of times to just close it off with a fucking bang, while also cropping up on an Arm & Hammer collab with his partner Ulysses on Give Thanks, which is another fucking choice song where both rappers talk about thanks and luck and appreciation in their own respective, again, obtuse fashion, which feels kind of like purposeful given when this album did come out. But Open Mike Eagle easily has my favorite bar on the project, with I make money like Tone Loc and Fern Gully. That shit fucking had me rolling. It was so goddamn funny and unexpected. I love a lot of the collaborators in the pot, but if we're talking like beat construction as well, given Blockhead is the titular mastermind behind the Ox, I think that the production on here is really fucking cool. Speaking of mastering to land, there's this cool like reversed brass sample that I think creates this sort of hazy mystique with which Mike uses to craft some really good shit. There's like an uneasy atmosphere that coats pockets of this, but I think that it creeps up really well on Poppy Seeds, where Blockhead balances these like twinkling pianos with this well-produced percussion beneath it. That same sort of uneasy dread permeating throughout Sad Vampire as well, with this like bell clanging with this tambourine, all with this lo-fi edge that gives it this misty haze to settle the listener into. The Quell Chris collab, the Cella Dwellers New, has this like almost theremin sound that also has like a French horn beneath it. It's got that kind of obtuse style that I've come to Blockhead for in the past, but I think that in tandem with the collaborators in the pot create this really good mixtape feeling project that I think showcases a lot of the talents at hand pretty strongly. This isn't going to be like, in a year where the hip-hop records that I've dropped I've really loved, this probably will end up somewhere in the upper middle echelon, because the stuff that's like reaching my top 20 is definitely like, it goes there. But I think that The Ox is a really fucking good album, and if you like stuff that you've heard from Blockhead, whether it's his Aesop collaborations or otherwise, or you like artists like Billy Woods and Quell Chris and you want to hear them work with a producer that you may never have but has had some buzz amidst the industry, The Ox is a decent place to go. I'm giving this an 8. I think it's another really strong release. I think Ace and Blockhead both just dropped quality shit this year, honestly.
By first-rate Kirkman, blood-curdling loops. Can be certain every sermon meet the burden of proof. Latest turn on.
I figured while I was diving into this Blockhead Aesop rock twofer, I'd also add another frequent collaborator of Aesop's into my pot this month with Homeboy Sandman and his new pocket project, Rich, which sees him pairing his own style of like off-kilter rapping with some self-evaluative, sort of reflective themes with these instrumentals that have the same light airiness as an album that I'm about to talk about. I fucking love the buoyant flutes on the beat of Bop. I think that that's a really nice, catchy song that I think is a decent showcase of Sandman's ability to rap with a little bit more of a catchier twist to it in a presentable way. Like this is a project by and large that I feel like I could give to somebody if they want like a slice of Homeboy that doesn't get quite as obtuse as he can get on other elements of his career. Off the Rip is another moment like that. I actually really like the catchy melody of the beat and how he interpolates that into the hook. He does keep his same kind of tongue-in-cheek cattiness on Then We Broke Up, which sort of just creates a flat line when looking at the past on your relationships that failed. And I think it's a really, really well accented punchline on his part as a songwriter. I like that also leans into other themes explored on here, like on Loner, where it feels like he's kind of extending a little more of the emotional depth to him that led up to him looking back on his relationships with such a bold, stern flatline. I think honestly my biggest critique of this is that it's a pocket project, because I do love the soundscape of this. I think the production just acts as a good juxtaposition to his style of rapping that I think creates this vibe all its own. Every track kind of feels like as it's getting started, it just kind of fizzles away. While I think that sort of fun melody interpolation is at its weakest on He Didn't Do Anything, I still like the energy of that song. I think as far as like an artist like this creating a project that feels indicative of pockets of the scene, while also seeing him tap into an atmosphere that I think suits him and he should explore more, this isn't a bad one. I don't think, as far as like measuring up to other rap albums that I've talked about this month and will talk about this month and throughout the year, this isn't quite up to that caliber because of its length and because just the songwriting, while strong, isn't as strong as other shit I've spun. I'm still landing with this at a 7. And it is a solid ass record that has some really good tracks from Homeboy Sandman. Andre 3000 decided to shock the world in 2023 by releasing his first full-length solo album. But the surprising thing with me to this isn't the album itself, because the album isn't a rap album. It is more inspired by the EP he dropped back in 2018, where he created a couple of pieces surrounded around a bass clarinet. However, this time he's deciding to do it with a flute. The thing is, that aspect of it is not the most shocking part about it to me personally. It's the discourse surrounding this. I know all Andre 3000 fans want to see him rap because he still shows that he's that good at rapping still. I mean, he's literally kept consistently dropping banger feature after banger feature throughout the 2010s and into the 2020s, so much so that I, in the middle of the last decade, created a meme of hashtag where is Andre 3000, because the rap game really needs him. What I like, though, is that he's just doing him, you know, and I can respect that. I liked that EP a lot, and I think that this album is also really fucking choice. I also like that he takes that idea of building an experience around the instrument a little more experimentally. You know, he doesn't do this like strictly jazz adjacent thing like that EP, and he really taps into this ambient, minimal, new age approach where he weaves stuff like shakers and gongs and, you know, some guitar and synth play. There's a lot of echoey pads that coat the atmosphere of this, and every track, for the most part, is like over 10 minutes and change. You know, there's a couple of deviations where he constructs these more leaner paced cuts, like Ants to You, Gods to Who, and 93 Till Infinity and Beyonce, which also kind of gives me the chance to talk a bit about the fact that all of these titles feel like they kind of tell their own stories, which with act as like the tone, or at least the general feel for each individual song. I don't know. This does feel like a thought out, well-conceptualized piece that sees Andre just having fun and experimenting in ways that appeal to him as an artist. Spoilers for the Redacted this month, but I am doing an Outcast Redacted, and throughout that I also talk about the fact that even when Outcast was a thing, Andre wanted to branch out and experiment outside of the rap box that he felt like he was kind of pigeonholed into. I know that he's recently talked about, you know, not feeling like he's worth rapping anymore, essentially, by, you know, saying that his age can factor into, you know, dropping rap albums for him nowadays, and I respect that. Yeah, there's rappers that are older than him still doing it, and I'm sure he could get that urge to do it once more, but I still like this. Is it my favorite album of the year? No. Is it my favorite ambient album of the year? Debatable. But I think that as far as like going out there, going for broke, and doubling down, tripling down on your own creative prospects and dropping an album that you know people probably aren't going to want to hear from you, but the ones that do will, but the ones that like your artistry will appreciate regardless. New Blue Sun is absolutely a prospect like that. If you like ambient music, listen to this. If you like hip-hop and you don't think you'll like ambient music, don't listen to this. Even if it's got one of your favorite rappers' names attached to it, you're going to be disappointed. But that whole discourse has already evolved into itself. And my recommendation more feels based as a really huge fan of just Andre the artist. I'm giving this an 8 because I do like it. And I do like new age ambient stuff, but there are some ideas on here that maybe feel a bit too drawn out. It's still got cool ideas. I like the weaving of the flute throughout this, and I think that he does so with some nice punctuality in the atmosphere. But for a first time, full swing, this is pretty good.
Where the heart is, but where's the love? Feeling lost in the world, they don't care about us. Back to the wall, we ain't had no plan.
A lot of the rappers that I've loved this year have seemingly been some of the busiest dudes in a calendar year, because Danny Brown joins the ranks of an artist like Billy Woods in dropping multiple records in a year with Quaranta, an album that not only acts as a spiritual successor to his album Triple X, which was my introduction to him, which acted as sort of a bookmark of sorts. It was him at 30, his feelings as a rapper, and kind of calling attention to that in some choice instances, whereas Quaranta definitely feels like it's leaning more into that reflective side in a way that kind of makes sense at this point in his life, especially given he spent the earlier part of the year just getting hype and going crazy with Peggy. I like that this also acts as sort of a calmer, more vibe-propelled experience to go against some of the density and boldness on Scaring the Hose. You know, it does see him still pinning together some just pretty great shit, like on Dark Sword Angel, which is a great collaboration with Quell Chris, who crops up a couple times on here, or on the track Shakedown, where he does a good job at carrying you throughout this narrative that starts with him in a studio. I love that the points that he does get reflective crop up in some choice instances, like on the intro Tantor and Ain't My Concern, where he sort of gives you an introduction to his headspace on this record before immediately attacking his feelings on, before immediately tackling his opinions on the current state of rap at his age on Ain't My Concern, another great Quell Chris produced track. I love that the twofer of YPB and Jen's Terrific Vacation with Bruiser Wolf and Casa Overall see him looking back on his life as a kid in Detroit with Wolf in a way that sort of has this haunting approach to it, given the beat has this uplifting sort of cheeriness to it. Before looking at the gentrification of a city on Jen's Terrific Vacation, where he looks back upon the places where he knows he's seen stuff like drug deals go down, only now it's a Whole Foods and shit like that. I also like how he sort of lets that act as a sort of doorway into more self-reflective stuff, like on Down With It and Celibate, which see him looking at a loss, which see him looking at a failed relationship and sort of his pain that he felt after the fact and how empty he felt amidst that, and Celibate being a point where he sort of flips the word celibate into selling a bit, but now that he is celibate, he no longer sells a bit. It's a clever turn of phrase that I think he spins into a really good hook, which is another great collaboration, this time with Mike. I like that on Hanami. He also looks at some of the sacrifices he did take on the road to his own successes and the regrets he may have had along the way. There's a lot of self-analysis on here that I know a lot of pockets of the rap scene have been doing in recent years, and I think that Danny's version of that is also really fucking good. I love a lot of the production on here, and I like how all of these sort of ideas feel like not only a good bookmark like 30, but a good continuation of a record like You Know What I'm Saying, which saw him getting a little quirky with some of his production ideas that were tangential from the Boldness on Atrocity exhibition, and I like how this further nurtures those ideas into something as well. I think this is a great fucking album, and as a fan of Danny Brown, I think that this just further cements that he is still just one of the most consistent rappers dropping shit. I'm giving this a 9. I think this is a really good album from Danny. I think that a lot of the collaborations are good. I like a lot of the wordplay. I like a lot of the flipping of phrases and words to give them that double meaning. I think that's just a well-written record. It's just well realized. I think that it's easily one of the best rap albums I've heard this year, in a year where everything I've loved has been pretty intensely so.
Next thing I'm drifting into open sky.
When it came to like catching up on some stuff throughout the end of the year, I knew I wanted to get to Sampha's sophomore outing, Lahai, because I hadn't gotten into his own music outside of the collaborations that I knew him from with artists like Solange and Kendrick on his most recent album. And I think that I didn't quite know what to fully expect, and I didn't really know what to fully expect with a project from him. I kind of half expected it to be more just like a straightforward, hook-driven record, you know? I was surprised to see this kind of like stream of consciousness style, but emotionally driven series of like electronic jams that still have a sense of catchiness in moments, but don't feel afraid to stray off into some tangents that I think unify this more dreamlike ideology that this record feels like it's propulsing with. You know, the sort of stuttering pianos that open it on Stereo Color Cloud give way to this impeccable groove that I think is cool as hell, that has this cyclical style that feels like one sort of reaching their own end before trying to wind down into something else. You know, it's got tracks like Suspended and Spirit that kind of unify some of the, you know, more central emotional ideas that the album's got going on of like self-improvement or self-love and being wrapped up in one's own love respectively with someone else. But because this album has this incredible sequencing to it, these more experimental ideas just kind of come into the fray and help blur the lines of, you know, unified bops and experimentation, see like the transition from Suspended into Satellite Business, 2 tracks that feel like they were made together, and I think have this really cool sort of shift into each other. I also like that he used that sort of electronic inspiration to sort of create a cyclical approach to his hook writing that I also think kind of helps tie those inspirations with his own brand of singing. Because I think he's got a really, unique voice, and I think that he's got one of those voices that's easy to kind of pick out of a lineup, but I think that he uses his ability to craft good melodies and blends it with that sort of repetitious style like on Only. That cyclical approach creates this strong personal drive within Can't Go Back, or on What If You Hypnotize Me, with this repetition of what if throughout the track itself, sort of giving the suspicious and paranoid lyrics this great resolve back into itself. I don't know. This is a masterfully pulled together record in my opinion, and easily one of the strongest of the year. I think that as far as like exceeding any expectations I may have had, this absolutely does so and makes me want to listen to his debut. I think that this is a really well-realized project that I think explores its themes in a both catchy yet nuanced fashion. I think that there's some real POV style writing throughout this that I think cements the listener very well into Sampha's headspace and POV. Outside of the tracks I listed, tracks like Inclination, Compass, I think the songwriting on that particular is a good showcasing of that kind of nuance in a good way. I love this record. I think that it's really fucking strong. I'm glad I spun it this year. It's one that I'm going to be trying to seek to add to my collection because it's absolutely a vibe on top of being just a well-written record. I'm teetering on this between a 9 and a 10. I fucking love this record. I think that it's choice, strong album of the year contender, and I think that it's absolutely just sublime. Even if I loved their 2018 album Loved, which was my introduction to Canadian metal band Ken Mode, I unfortunately missed their record from last year, Null, so I decided to rectify that by spinning their newest album, Void, and it is a project that I absolutely adore. As far as continuing to create this super intense, sludgy, but well-produced set of tracks that just pummels the listener in the most visceral way. The paranoia within the opener, the Shrike with its just dense bass and sludgy riffage cements the listener in this pseudo-dreadful but also just really unnerving place that I think it's ramped up to 11 by the time the whirlwind drums start to come in on the back half of the song. That paranoia and uneasement getting further pushed into this dreadful realm on the track These Wires, which pulls the intensity back a little bit and adds some piano into the mix, but I think the band sort of sticks the landing gracefully on this mood pivot that I don't think loses the overall dread that the record really gets its foot off on. And I love how that morphs along the instrumental cut that follows We're Small Enough. There's this irritation that's seething throughout I Cannot that keeps that intensity lively too, that I think helps keep the sequencing of this record just all the more engaging. This is a very good, well-paced project for how brief it is, which goes through its own circuit of re-aggression after that, like I mentioned, but I think casts itself off with this sort of internal ennui. There's a climax within He Was a Good Man, He Was a Taxpayer that lets this aggressive sort of peak get reached that I think gets to dwindle out into the sunset pretty fucking strongly on the closer Not Today Old Friend, which feels like the sort of immediate reaction to a lot of the pain that could have been wrought through He Was a Good Man, He Was a Taxpayer's close. it finds a way to sort of reintroduce some of those more moody or bleak tones that sort of worked throughout the middle of the record and gives it its own nice resolve. I don't know. This record's really fucking strong. I think that, like, it's got me even more interested in their back catalog. I'm definitely going to be checking out Null after this, but I think that if you want, like, a strong, intense metal album from this year, Ken Mode's Void is definitely one that you should be spinning. I'm going to be giving this an 8 out of 10. It's really fucking strong. Honestly, it's an instance of, like, one that I just kind of would have wanted to see a little more fleshed out throughout some of the more bleak tangents that this album spins into. I also think that just, again, it's a fucking choice album.
This is clarification. That's when spinning out of control.
One of the things I've decided to do this year, I guess, out of morbid curiosity, is check in on more of the metal bands I used to listen to a lot more back in the day. And Tesseract, I actually fell off of relatively quickly. I don't think that their stuff following their debut is terrible. I think that it just quickly got a lot less interesting to me. I think that their sonic dynamic, justifiably due to, like, band turmoil and just a need for something else, I guess, out of all of that, just wasn't my bag. I thought that, like, their roots were a lot more sort of essential, especially when it came to, like, 2010's gent. But with this new record, War of Being, I feel like they definitely recapture, at least to some capacity, components that I think made one an interesting spin. You know, it helps that it's trying to aim for this grand theatricality with emotional gravitas that I think they utilize this intense style and airy atmosphere very well, especially when it comes to, like, creating those good crescendos that lead into those more atmospheric solo-driven movements. You know, tracks like Echoes and Burden, especially when they get to the more intense moments, really hook me in and kept me invested in moments like the closer Sacrifice with its, like, gent prog-ass bass solo, or the title tracks like 11.5-minute Crawl, which I think has these better uses of, like, ebbing and flowing with the listener. I love that a lot of these, you know, I love that this concept of these two within this almost dystopian-esque world get to have this sort of painting of pure dread painted by the band. The riff work on the Gray and the way that they somehow just fuse this sort of melding of a lot of their discography into this really strong cut just kept me coming back. Sure, I'm still not the biggest fan of the more overtly just atmospheric, more melody-driven tracks like Sirens and Tender, but I feel like those moments being so brief amidst a record that has a lot more musically interesting to me don't weigh the project down as much. And I honestly think feel a little more refreshing when they come around in the track listing. And I'll be honest, while I think that a lot of the performances are really strong, the one track where I feel like the performance is, especially vocally, maybe the hardest to sit through, it's Legion. I think that there's some real emotional weight to a lot of his lyrics, and I think that, like, his performance definitely brings that emotion to the forefront. But if I'm being, like, a critic, it's a little spotty in pockets in a way that, like, I feel is a little distracting. The way they weave around these sonic ideas amidst this world they're trying to paint. And I think that they paint the world pretty solidly, in my opinion. I think that it's not necessarily the best concept or best execution of a concept album, but I think that as far as, like, blending those themes together with a sort of emotional through line, I think at least comes through pretty strongly on here. And I think this is pretty good. I think this is pretty damn good. I'm giving this a 7. I think this is really strong. I think that if you enjoy or you have nostalgia for, like, 2010's gent, it's absolutely worth your time, in my opinion. More so, especially, than the last handful of releases. At least how they closed out the 2010s. But I'm at least walking away from this one a lot more positively than I have recently with this band. Adversely to listening to Tesseract, I closed my month with industrial icons Godflesh, who have really need no introduction if you're like familiar with the genre, but they've got classics like Street Cleaner and Hymns under their belt. And I had listened to one of their two 2017 returns in Post Self, which I thought was a pretty strong return that saw them sort of taking some of what I liked production-wise from them and finding ways to fit it into the sort of modern shelf of music. But with this newest album, Purge, they're seemingly going even darker in sound and scope. You know, there's some components of this that I think definitely more evoke a vintage touch in ways that are good, like on the track Landlord, which uses this sort of more electronically kinetic route to keep adding noise upon the listener that I think really just hits a good peak. I love the guitars on there. I love the various mechanical clangs that clash throughout the instrumental. And I think that comes back into play on Permission. I think that, again, the lead riffs on that are fucking choice. And I think that once the electronic beat does come in, while it's of a different ilk and evokes maybe a different electronic atmosphere, I think while they're adding all this other noise to the mix, it helps harmonize it into a lovely cocktail. But I think falters on moments like the title track opener, which feels like the sort of scraps left on the floor from 1998 and picked up only now, which I think also kind of crops up in components of the track Army of None. I think the overall message of that song, or at least the delivery of the message of that song, also kind of evokes that same late 90s energy. It's got ideas in the pot sonically that I like, and I think that overall them making a track like that is done better than some of their contemporaries were doing in 98. But my real issue with this comes in some of the mixing or some of the production choices, because especially on records like Street Cleaner, and on this, in some pockets, one of my favorite components of this group is how they really nail a good drum sound. And there's parts of here that do, but Army of None's a victim of that, in my opinion, where I think the drums just aren't as, you know, attention grabbing. I feel like the drums kind of get buried under a lot of the haze of mythology itself. I love a lot of the guitar work of that song, and I think that the ways that they sort of meld the industrial ideas with that create this cool, sludgy, mechanical sort of style. But I think that outside of the, like, core drums, a lot of the other sonic components of it, percussive-wise, just kind of feel lost in a way that I don't think suits the track well. I think it ends on a much stronger note that it started with You Are the Judge, the Jury, and the Executioner. I actually fucking adore that track. I think that the bass rumbling beneath just creates this good ominous feel that I think transforms across this 8-minute juggernaut closer in pure, dreadful harmony. I don't know. I like the parts of this that I enjoy a hell of a lot, but I think that as far as like consistency on here, it is definitely not the calling card of this particular record from the group. I definitely recommend other records of theirs above this if you're looking to get into Godflesh, but it's still not terrible. Just given the caliber these guys deal with, I think that it's lesser. I'm giving it a 7, like Tesseract, but for very different reasons than that project. Those are my reviews. Did you agree? Did you like them? Did you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. If you did like the video, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. December's kind of a wacky one this year, as it usually is, but I'm going to have some fun stuff throughout the month regardless. Sorry that this also dropped later than I really intended, but either way, I'm going to go. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.